Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the incredibly gripping and honestly tragic story of a young kid from the slums of Tondo who literally ignited a nationwide rebellion. We usually think we know exactly how empires fall, right? It's always through the grand maneuvering of highly educated elites or these well-funded generals. But the story we are looking at today completely shatters that mold.
Think about it for a second. What if the person who kick-started the Philippine Revolution wasn't some wealthy, powerful elite, but a poor, self-taught worker? It really flips the script on history. This is the wild, heartbreaking story of Andres Bonifacio, a guy who dared to take on the massive Spanish Empire with absolutely zero wealth, no formal education, but just pure grit and an unshakable belief in freedom.
To really understand Bonifacio, we've got to look at the stark contrast between him and the other reformists of his day. On one side, you've got the Ilustrados. These were the wealthy, educated elites sipping coffee in Europe and advocating for peaceful reform. And then on the exact opposite side of the spectrum, you have Andres Bonifacio. He wasn't hanging out in European cafes. He was a working-class kid just trying to survive. And he's the one who looked around and realized that peaceful reform was a dead end. Only an armed revolution could actually win true independence. So where did that fire come from? Well, you have to look at his childhood. Born on November 30th, 1863, right in the slums of Tondo, Manila, his early life was basically a masterclass in sheer survival. When he was just 14 years old, absolute tragedy struck. Both of his parents died of illness. Suddenly, he's an orphan, and he is tasked with raising his 5 younger siblings all by himself. He had to drop out of school, hitting the streets to make and sell paper fans and wooden canes just to keep his family fed. He eventually hustled his way into jobs as a messenger and a warehouse clerk.
But here is the really fascinating part. That crushing poverty, it never stopped his drive. After working these grueling days of manual labor, he'd go home, sit under this dim light, and literally teach himself to read and write in both Tagalog and Spanish. And get a load of his reading list. He devoured books on the French Revolution, biographies of U.S. presidents, Victor Hugo's epic tale of rebellion, Les Miserables, and the highly subversive novels of his contemporary, Dr. Jose Rizal. So while the elites were out there politely debating change, Bonifacio was quietly studying the exact blueprint of how empires fall.
And that brings us to a massive turning point. Believe it or not, early on, Bonifacio actually supported Jose Rizal's peaceful reform movement. But then, in July 1892, Spanish authorities arrested Rizal and exiled him to Mindanao. For Bonifacio, this was it, the moment of absolute clarity. The whole illusion of peaceful reform was just dead in the water. He realized the harsh reality that Spain was never, ever going to willingly hand over freedom. So, on the exact same day Rizal was arrested, July 7, 1892, Bonifacio decided it was time for radical action.
In a dimly lit house in Manila, he and a handful of trusted allies created a secret, phantom organization. The name was as epic as the mission itself. Katasta Sasang, Kagalang-galangang Katipunan na Mag-aanak ng Bayan. In English, that translates to the highest and most honorable society of the children of the nation. We usually just call it Katipunan. And in this incredibly dangerous, underground world, Bonifacio was given the title of Supremo, the supreme leader.
Now, what made the Katipunan so totally different from everything that came before it? It was their uncompromising goal. They weren't politely asking for better treatment or a seat at the table in the Spanish Parliament. No, their goal was complete, absolute independence from Spain, and they were going to get it through revolution. It was bold, it was highly dangerous, and obviously strictly illegal.
Building a massive underground army right under the noses of the Spanish authorities is no small feat. So, Bonifacio set up this brilliant, highly secretive triangle recruitment system. And joining wasn't just a secret handshake. Initiations involved intense blood compacts, a tradition known as sandugo, where new members literally signed their oaths in their own blood. And because Bonifacio spoke the language of the working class, he wasn't just attracting a few frustrated intellectuals. The Katipunan absolutely exploded in size, swelling from a handful of guys in a room to tens of thousands of workers, farmers, and everyday Filipinos.
This rapid growth really shines a spotlight on just how terrible the daily reality was for regular folks back then. Every single Filipino had to carry a cedula. It was a community tax certificate, but honestly, it was so much more than a tax. It was a physical, heavy symbol of their subjugation, a daily reminder right in their pocket that they didn't own their land and they didn't even really own their own lives. All of this simmering tension finally hit a boiling point in August 1896 when a devastating betrayal exposed the Katipunan's secrets to the Spanish.
Facing immediate arrest and execution, Bonifacio knew they had crossed the point of no return. There was no backing down now. He gathered thousands of his men in the hills, and in what is easily one of the most explosive and iconic moments in Philippine history, an event known as the Cry of Pugad Lawin, Bonifacio and his revolutionaries pulled out those sigillas, the literal symbols of their oppression, and ripped them to shreds. They started shouting, "Long live the Philippines! Long live the Katipunan!" Right then and there, the revolution had officially, irreversibly begun.
Now, declaring a revolution is one thing, but actually fighting a global empire? That's a whole different story. Bonifacio's forces were mostly untrained, and they were going up against rifles with just bolos, basically machetes. So those early attacks on heavily fortified Spanish depots, they ended in devastating military losses. But here's the absolute genius of what Bonifacio sparked. The movement wasn't contained to just one battle. Even when they lost, the idea caught on. Rebellion started erupting all across the archipelago simultaneously. The whole nation was suddenly on fire.
But as the revolution grew, a new and frankly fatal danger popped up, and it came from the inside. Over in the province of Cavite, a general named Emilio Aguinaldo was actually finding real success on the battlefield. Suddenly, the revolutionary forces fractured into two very intense factions. You had the Magdiwang, who were fiercely loyal to Bonifacio because he founded the whole thing. And then you had the Migdelo, who aligned with Aguinaldo because of his military victories.
To try and settle this dangerous divide, they called a convention in Tejeros on March 22, 1897. On paper, the stated goal was to patch things up and form one unified revolutionary government. But the reality? It quickly turned into a brutal political ambush against the very man who started the revolution in the first place.
Despite being the Supremo, the literal founder, Bonifacio gets voted out of the presidency in favor of Aguinaldo. Bonifacio was then elected to a much lesser post, Director of the Interior. But then, an Aguinaldo loyalist actually stands up and openly objects, claiming Bonifacio doesn't have the formal education required to do the job. Just think about the tragic irony there. The educated elites are once again dismissing the working-class hero. Deeply humiliated and seeing that the whole convention was driven by regional politics, Bonifacio used his power as Supremo to declare the entire assembly void, and he stormed out.
That decision turned out to be fatal. Aguinaldo's faction immediately declared Bonifacio a threat to the revolution, and the escalation was stunningly rapid. By April 1897, Aguinaldo's men attacked Bonifacio's camp. In the ensuing violence, the Supremo was shot in the arm and brutally stabbed in the throat. Bleeding and captured, he was dragged away to face judgment from the exact same people he had armed to fight the Spanish. What happens next is just an agonizing betrayal. Bonifacio, alongside his brother Procopio, was subjected to what most historians agree was a total kangaroo court. Aguinaldo's government charged them with treason and sedition. Let that sink in for a moment. The man who birthed the revolution was on trial for committing treason against it. He was denied a fair hearing, and despite some appeals for clemency, the sentence was death. The end of his story is intensely somber. On May 10, 1897, up in the mountains of Maragondon, Cavite, Andres Bonifacio was executed by a firing squad, murdered by his own countrymen. He was only 33 years old, and he died without ever getting to see the independent nation that he sacrificed literally everything to build.
He never became president, and yes, his life ended in profound tragedy, but history remembers him exactly for who he was, the undeniable father of the Philippine Revolution. And why does his legacy matter so much today? Because he single-handedly took this quiet, whispered desire for reform and turned it into a roaring, nationwide struggle. He proved that you don't need a fancy degree or a massive bank account to fight for your country. He mobilized the everyday, ordinary Filipino. By founding the Katipunan, he cemented the idea that freedom is a fundamental right for absolutely everyone, regardless of what social class they are born into.
This tragic end actually fuels a massive, ongoing debate among modern historians today. Should Bonifacio be considered the ultimate national hero, or does that title belong to José Rizal? Some folks say Bonifacio deserves it hands down for taking action and leading the physical revolution. Others argue that Rizal's brilliant writings were the essential spark that even made Bonifacio's actions possible. But, rather than pitting them as rivals, maybe the best way to view them is as two equal forces of the exact same struggle. Rizal awakened the Filipino mind, while Bonifacio armed the Filipino spirit.
So, as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a lingering thought to really chew on today. When you look back at the brutal, messy cost of revolution and the incredible weight of trying to build a nation from scratch, who do you think truly deserves the title of national hero? Is it the one who awakened the mind with the pen or the one who armed the spirit with the sword?
Thank you so much for exploring this remarkable history with me. Keep asking those big questions and keep seeking the truth behind the history we think we know.